Today we are taking up Sonnet 87 by Shakespeare, also entitled as Farewell, Thou Art Too Dear for My Possessing. Now you have the text of the poem given here, and you may follow it while I explain the poem. Also, for your reference, is the modern version available on the screen. Now, first of all, about the poem. Sonnet 87 is the first sonnet after the rival poet sequence. Now, sonnet number 79 to 86 has been entitled as the sonnets based on the rival poets, meaning other poets of his time, of Shakespeare's time, who were also patronized by his mentor. It begins a new sequence of sonnets dealing with the narrator's breakup with the fair lord. The first word captures the essence of the sonnet precisely: farewell. Immediately, we are reintroduced to the theme of self deprecation and inadequacy that was especially predominant in the preceding rival poet sequence, Thou art too dear for my possessing. This sentiment is repeated again and again throughout the sonnet. For example, in line number 6, he says, And for that riches, where is my deserving? The narrator thereby acknowledges his unworthiness and presents that as justification for the fair lord's rejection. Sonnet 87 reads like a conclusion to the sonnet sequence describing the dominance of the rival poets, but in fact is the poet's farewell to the youth who has returned to him but art too dear for the poet to possess. The theme of farewell unifies this sonnet. In varying degrees, farewell is alluded to in the following 9 poems, meaning 9 poems after 87, number 87. When the friendship between the poet and the young man collapses, only then does the poet discover that the young man was merely a dream. He concedes defeat. And bids the young man a regretful goodbye. There is a subtle contrast here between the paradox present in some of the earlier sonnets like sonnet number 82 and 83 and the one which now threatens to come into view. Whereas in those earlier sonnets, Shakespeare made out that the best way to praise the fair youth was to say nothing. And he writes, I quote him here, and let his beauty speak for itself. Now Shakespeare is implying that the fair youth is not worth bothering with because his worth so far exceeds what the bard deserves. We wouldn't go so far as to say that this is a deliberate contrast, but it highlights the way in which Sonnet 87 represents a shift away from the message of the previous sonnets. Shakespeare's feelings towards the fair youth appears to be cooling in this particular sonnet. Now let's take it quatrain wise. We take up the first quatrain. Farewell, thou art too dear for my possessing, and like enough thou knowest thy estimate. The charter of thy worth gives thee releasing. My bonds in thee are all determinate. Now the very first word is farewell. He is bidding farewell to the young man. Why? Thou art too dear for my possessing. He says you are far more valuable than I deserve to get. And like enough thou knowest thy estimate. He says it is very possible that you know how worthwhile you are. The charter of thy worth gives thee releasing. He says, that charter, it's a term, it's a legal term, and he says that gives you the right to get released from me. My bonds in thee are all determinate. He says whatever bonds we had, obviously it was not a written bond, so whatever bonds there existed between both of us, it is all over now. There's nothing more that can bind you to me. So in the sonnet's first quatrain, the poet unequivocally bids farewell to the young man. Surprisingly, the tone is not melodramatic. Now you see, Shakespeare is not getting very sad there. It is as if the poet was simply stating a fact and then explaining the reason for it. Like he gives the reason. Thou art too dear for my possessing, meaning you are far too precious for me to have you. And like enough thou knowest that thy estimate, and you know your worth. Dear in the first line implies that the youth is both too costly and too much loved. And the legal terminology in the first 4 lines suggests how weak is the poet's right to possess the youth. We like the metaphor in the opening quatrain where the poet likens the fair youth to a bondsman being released from servitude. Obviously, he is getting released. All this while he was taking care of Shakespeare, but now is the time to get released, as Shakespeare puts it. Now, lines 3 and 4 in the first quatrain offer some good discussion of the theme of financial bondage. We see, following the poet's characterization of the fair lord as too dear for my possessing, he describes the fair lord's preciousness as such that it grants him certain privileges as a charter would a corporation, including the privilege to declare himself free of all obligations. The narrator's bonds or financial obligations with the fair lord are thereby becoming null and void. The fair lord is free of commitment by mere virtue of his dearness, being more worthy than the narrator. Shakespeare may have chosen this imagery simply for the sake of metaphor, or perhaps there is in fact some deeper meaning to it. Perhaps the fair lord was indeed the poet's financial benefactor, but is now freed from that obligation, having chosen to take his business elsewhere. The narrator sees two possible explanations for how he ever managed to obtain the fair lord's attention in the first place. Either the fair lord was not then aware that he was too good for the narrator, or he had not yet realized that the narrator was not good enough for him. In any case, the narrator's love for the fair lord was not realistic, for it took on the character of a dream. Now let's look at the second quatrain. For how do I hold thee but by thy granting, and for that riches where is my deserving? The cause of this fair gift in me is wanting, and so my patent back again is swerving. Now see, we'll see in the second and third quatrains both, they explain the poet's reasons for saying goodbye to the young man. So first quatrain we had, he was saying a goodbye. Now we come to know why he was saying the goodbye. So in the second quatrain, he characteristically reverts to the questioning of his own worth and rhetorically asks why he ever thought he deserved the young man's affections. And he says, and for that riches where is my deserving? Meaning, do I deserve all the riches that were being bestowed on me? The cause of this fair gift in me is wanting. He says, for whatever reason this gift was bestowed on me, I don't have that. That goodness, that quality in me is not there. The poet's eyes finally have been opened about his relationship with the young man, for in the third quatrain he acknowledges that the strain in their friendship is the fault of both. We'll take up the next quatrain and we'll see this point there. Thyself thou gavest thy own worth then not knowing, or me to whom thou gavest it else mistaking. So thy great gift upon misprison growing comes home again, or better judgment making. So again, he says this, that in the third quatrain he says that he acknowledges the strain in their friendship is the fault of both. He says it's not just one person who is to be blamed for this, it's both of them. The poet's eyes are finally opened about his relationship. He acknowledges that they are both drifting apart. Thou self thou gavest thy own worth then not knowing, or me to whom thou gavest it else mistaking. Meaning, you gave your friendship, you gave your patronage to me. Maybe you did not realize your own worth at that time, or maybe you thought me to be better than what I actually was. This sonnet says what oft was thought but never so well expressed, as we always say about Shakespeare. Shakespeare's use of the word misprison is interesting in this regard. Now, misprison actually means an error. Following the poem's earlier references to releasing, bonds, it's as if the word misprison, meaning, if you take it in the context, is misinterpretation or error, and chiming with mistaking from the previous line, is inviting a pun on prison and echoing Shakespeare's determination to free himself from the shackles of slavish devotion to someone who is unworthy. Now look at the final couplet. Thus have I had thee as a dream doth flatter, in sleep a king, but waking no such matter. So the final couplet leaves little doubt that the poet no longer deludes himself about his and the young man's relationship. Surveying his past actions, the poet concludes that only two avenues are there, fantasy and reality, were ever open for him. Thus have I had thee as a dream doth flatter, meaning when he had the a young man with him, it was as though he was living in a world of dreams. In sleep a king, but waking no such matter. Sadly, fantasy or reality do not offer the poet any consolation for the youth's emotional separation from him. For fantasy is make believe, and reality exposes the gulf that exists between the poet and the young man. And probably that gulf had always existed. So while he was living with the young man, while he was having interactions with him, while the young man was patronizing him, it was almost dreamlike. But it's almost like waking up. When you wake up from your dreams, you realize that it was all fiction, it was all imagination. Similarly, Shakespeare now realizes that his relationship with the young man is almost all like a dream which never exists. Now we'll take the rhyme and diction here. There is an abundance of feminine rhyme, and rhymes of at least feminine rhyme explained thus that it's rhyme of at least 2 syllables with the final syllable unstressed. The repetition of the ing suffix results in uncharacteristic monotony, and the fact that almost all of the lines in the sonnet have 11 syllables. Perhaps the poet's farewell to the fair lord is symbolized here by his abandonment of the poetic conventions he once relied on for sonnets of praise. Now we find use of words that give financial flavor to the sonnet, like dear, estimate, worth, riches, gift, patent. Then we have words that give a legal metaphor to this sonnet at different places, like words like charter, patent, and misprison. If you have any questions, you may put it down in the segment below and I will answer them. Thank you.